รรสโหดเม็ดมะม่วงหิมพานต์ทอดหวานมันกรอบหอมอร่อยเคี้ยวเพลินลดพิเศษเหลือห่อละ169 บาทจากปกติราคา180 บาท
สวัสดีครับ Welcome to another edition of Connections for Thai Move Talk. I am your host, Brian Berletic.I want to talk about Myanmar. I want to talk about Myanmar and the threat it poses to the rest of ASEAN, and probably not in the way you're thinking. We keep hearing from mostly Western sources that Myanmar is a threat to the region because we have an undemocratic military regime oppressing the people inside of Myanmar, but it's actually the exact opposite. It's the opposition backed by the West attempting to burn the country to the ground, sabotage its relationship with the rest of the region, and create a starting point where the US can then spread this instability throughout Southeast Asia and eventually encircle and contain China itself. I want to show you an example of just how out of control the propaganda has become. I want to show you this op-ed. It's an op-ed, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will see that it was originally published in Reporting ASEAN series, and Reporting ASEAN has nothing to do with ASEAN. It's funded by the US government right here. It says on their official website, the US State Department, US Embassy in Bangkok, and the Henrik Boll Foundation, which is connected to the Green Party in Germany. And both of these government organizations are also funding anti-government and also anti-monarchy protests and opposition groups here in Thailand.So this is an effort to destabilize the entire region. Myanmar is just the worst possible example of just how far this can go and how much damage can be done. Now, let's take a look at this actual op-ed. 1 year post-coup, light ahead after darkness. And it's a question. And the answer is no. Because...if the opposition backed by the US loses, they still have completely destroyed the country. And if the US-backed opposition somehow wins, you can just look at a nation like Libya, where US-backed opposition forces also won, and how it is a failed state to this day, 10 years after the war backed by the US ravaged Libya. The country is a failed state to this day. This is the fate that awaits Myanmar if the US-backed opposition somehow prevails. And that's actually what this article op-ed is about. They're talking about this darkness that's fallen over Myanmar. What they're not going to talk about is how the government that was ousted in that coup was being run out of Washington and out of London. How Aung San Suu Kyi literally traveled to Washington, D.C. to consort with the National Endowment for Democracy, who built up her entire political party, and all of the organizations and infrastructure that support it and continuously get it into power during elections that are most definitely undermined by foreign interference. If we go through this op-ed, they're going to talk about the People's Defense Forces. These are armed terrorist groups that rove across Myanmar, killing anyone who doesn't join their movement. They're not just fighting armed soldiers and police officers. They're killing absolutely anyone who refuses to join their movement. And I want to show you an article from Myanmar's own opposition media, Myanmar Now, funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. This was from August 2021, and they're talking about how they slaughtered these rail police who were trying to protect the train from attacks being carried out by this so-called People's Defense Force. They attack infrastructure, and they attack any sort of civil servant. And I want to show you where they themselves admit this. It says right here, this is one of the People's Defense Force fighters, Lei Pie-wan. He says, this means that anyone in uniform who continues to work for the junta, including traffic police, firefighters, and even Red Cross workers, is fair game. This means they will murder nurses and doctors if they do not join the opposition. This is a terrorist movement. This is not a pro-democracy opposition defending themselves. This is a terrorist movement hunting down anyone who does not help them advance their political agenda. A foreign-sponsored political agenda at that. Now, if we go back to this op-ed, they also talk about the national unity government. And I've showed people how the so-called national unity government here, how ministers in this fake parallel government, ministers like the Foreign Affairs Minister, Zin Mar Ang, how she literally has her own webpage on the National Endowment for Democracy's website. This is how badly infiltrated and controlled by foreign interests Myanmar's opposition is. This is a situation that no sovereign country in the world could tolerate. This is a government that Myanmar's military could not allow to continue holding power. It is not a government that represents the people of Myanmar, no matter how many rigged elections they win. This is a government that clearly works for foreign interests. This was the recolonization of Myanmar, a nation that suffered for many years, decades, under British colonization. So you really cannot blame Myanmar's military for finding this unacceptable. No nation would. And if you come down here, the author of this article even admits that their country is plummeting into the gravest political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in its modern history. And they claim that they see some sort of bright future ahead beyond the darkness, a future that until recently seemed to be an impossibility, or one that would take generations to shape if the coup had not happened. And their reasoning is that all of these opposition groups who used to fight with one another, now they're all united against the government. And this is artificial, and this is being done by the US. The US is backing them and directing them to overthrow Myanmar's current government, overthrow the military, and then once they seize power, they're going to go right back at killing one another and fighting with one another, just like in Libya, just like in every single country the US has done this to. Myanmar is not going to be the first exception where everyone is still holding hands once this is over. I wanted to do a video about Myanmar to update people on what is going on. I want to warn people about just how deeply the West is involved. I want to warn people about this so-called national unity government and how the Western media and Western organizations are trying to prop it up. This is from MISMA, which is funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy, and they are posting this article, Myanmar's national unity government nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. This is a government completely controlled by the US, who literally have members, ministers, who are fellows at the US National Endowment for Democracy, and the NUG openly declared war on their own country. Yes, the head of the national unity government declared war on their own country, and now they're being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. This is how out of control this propaganda is, and if no one speaks up about this, you will have entire sections of the population buying into this, including here in ASEAN. If this opposition in Myanmar prevails, the country will be burned to the ground. It will be undermining ASEAN's peace and stability for many years to come. Again, just look at Libya, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, look at every single country the US goes into, and ask yourself, what is the outcome? Is Myanmar going to be the first exception to this rule? And the answer is absolutely not. That does it for this week's edition of Connections for Thai Move Talk. Until next week, Sawadee Krap.